And we're back, and we are moving into our first conversation for this morning. We are joined virtually, that is, by Senator Mark Lizarraga. Of course, he is the senator representing the business community. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, guys. How are you both doing? Marlene, Gavin, it's a pleasure to be with you guys this morning.
All right. Well, we're glad that you're able to join us this morning. Yesterday was definitely a critical day in the Senate, and while we did our reports in the news last night, there's a lot more to be able to unpack. So I want to just step back a bit and talking about the presentation of the report, I think was preceded by how long it took. And I want to get your perspective on that and just the input that the senators involved actually had in preparing the report.
Well, you know, first of all, there was a lot of material to look at. As you know, the hearings took a long time, over a year. In my view, they could have even continued, but we would have had a lot more repetition, perhaps. I believe that there were a lot of people that we needed to interview, and for some reason, the clerk and the police kept saying that they couldn't find them. What are the JPs, a lot of the agents that we requested we could not meet. But nevertheless, I think at the end of the hearings, we had a pretty good picture of what it was that was taking place within and around the department and who was participating in what took place. So that took a long while. And then originally we had legal advice, the committee had legal advice, and that person was tasked to draft a report for us, among other things. And that was not forthcoming, and that took a very, very, very long while. But as you know, the legislation is very clear that ultimately it's the chairman that's responsible for a report. And then the chairman did produce a report in time. He had apologized publicly, of course, for not getting into it right away because he had personal and other issues. And then he produced his draft, presented his draft, I believe, in January. Some of the members had requested some more time, including myself. I had made preliminary contributions almost instantly. And I guess that's why I was not featured in the FLAC. But the other members were consulting and were getting feedback. And then COVID came, of course, which further delayed it. But anyhow, we're here today.
Yes.
And we have a report, and I think it's commendable that it is a report that received the support of everyone, and we have suggestions on the way forward, and so I think it's long anticipated. I think it's a good report that had input from everyone, and I don't think there's anything political about it. Absolutely, otherwise those members that represent the government side that sat on the committee, of course, they would have had an opportunity to submit additional comments if they differed from the actual report that was adopted, and that did not happen. So in this spirit, we can say that it was unanimously accepted.
Yeah. Now, you know, we ask about the timing of the report because, you know, we're trying to refresh our memories of the scandal as it unfolded, the inquiry as it took place over almost a year, and just the different interviews and personal experiences that were shared. But the purpose of this report, if we are to recall, is to identify what wrongdoings took place, how they were able to take place, and to make recommendations as to how to improve. Let's start off with what for you is the most critical revelation that has been made in this inquiry.
Well, I think the evidence displayed that there was a significant breakdown in systems, and there were serious failures, illegalities, as it concerned the issuance of visas, nationality, and passports. There was a culture that allowed this to happen. And we believe that everybody in the department knew about it. We believe everybody in the ministry knew about it. I'm not saying we believe. Testimony reveals this. And certainly the powers that be knew about it and may very well have even participated in it, or many of them did. So the laws are very clear as to what it is you need to apply for a visa, to then be listened to, or to receive an application for nationality. The law is clear. It outlines how you go about getting your nationality, and then how you go about getting your passport. We know that in one instance, and I must put a caveat here and saying that this report, period, only touched the tip of the iceberg. I mean, it was only 3 months from one year and 3 months from the other year, I believe, that was looked at. So can you imagine the volumes it would have been if we'd done a full report for the 2 years or a full report for the last 12 years? Anyhow, so the systems in place were ignored. And for the most part, some testimony revealed that 90% of the applications that were brought in, especially by agents and by political operatives and by ministers, 90% of them had information that was missing, that were incomplete at one time. So it showed that for some reason, people were not following the rules, the laws, the guidelines that you need to follow when you apply for visas, nationalities, and passports. The Auditor General, we believe, did a very good job in highlighting a lot of these ills, and she made excellent recommendations as to how to correct them and what needed to be done to correct them at every step of the way.
Would you say that what the inquiry has done is perhaps formally document what many have known to take place anecdotally?
I think so. I think it certainly it's certainly the hearings you're saying. Sorry.
Yeah, and the report.
I mean, we had knowledge that what was happening. A lot of people knew what was happening. But the Auditor General's report, I think, brought it to a light and detailed it very extensively. I mean, I don't think the hearings needed to formalize it. I think the hearings was a result of the Auditor General's report, and then the public outcry. And I must commend the public here and the teachers and the business community and everybody that made the outcry, the churches and all that, I believe. And so it was just, I mean, too much. People saw the abuses. People saw the impact it was having on our cultural landscape, on our business landscape. And people said enough is enough.
Yeah.
And perhaps you can also take us back to the hearings in terms of just the testimony that led to a lot of these findings, because of course, one, we do have the records to show what happened, but the individuals some of whom must have participated, some of whom facilitated a lot of the activities that we're talking about. Perhaps you can also talk a little bit about that, about the findings from, and when we go back to the hearings and the persons involved, what you can talk a little bit about that.
Well, Gavin, I don't want to go back. Gavin, I think several persons that came before us took the hearings very seriously.
Yeah.
And I would like to thank them. I think the previous directors did an excellent job in trying to share with us their experiences, and they gave us a very good picture firsthand of what was taking place and what they were trying to do to correct the ills that they knew were in the department. And their testimony was important because they indicated that people in the ministry knew about these things. One director even said, we were focused on bigger things. We weren't focused on correcting those. So they knew, everybody knew what was happening in the department. And some of that testimony was very helpful, Gavin. other people, quite frankly, were very disrespectful of the process and perhaps do not understand the seriousness and do not understand the powers that the Senate actually has. And we believe that many of the witnesses may even have perjured themselves, or certainly some of them, because the testimony we got were conflicting. I mean, they can't all be telling the truth. So part of our recommendations were that, you know, the relevant authorities certainly need to now pick up the ball and run with it, since they claim that they were waiting for this this report to move with their investigations. We differ from them, of course. We believe that the investigation should have taken place already, should have commenced, you know, from the get-go, and that that they did not need for the Senate to put out a report, having had the quite comprehensive reports of the Auditor General. But certainly, you know, the popular saying is, no, that's on the water under the bridge. It is what it is. But we need to move forward now. And in that light, the committee has made what we believe are excellent recommendations. Yeah. And certainly one of the recommendations is, Gavin, that those authorities in the ministry, those authorities in the public service, and those authorities, especially here now, the police and the DPP, need to look at this thing and give it the seriousness that it deserves.
Yeah. Let's look at the recommendations that have come out in the final report, and because let's historically we've had inquiries similar to this before in different departments or different agencies. And I think the concern always is that, you know, there's a public outcry, there's an inquiry, you get some information, but not as much change comes as a result from it. And that's why looking at the recommendations allows us to know what is being proposed as a way for us to have a more stringent process when issuing these types of documents.
Well, you know, on the contrary, what we propose is an easier process. We believe that when the systems are too choked with bureaucracy, it creates opportunity for corruption. We believe that, yes, it should be a thorough system, but it should be simplified, and anybody should be able to apply for a visa without help. Anybody should be able to go through the process of nationality without an agent, without help, without ministerial support or intervention. We believe that it could be done electronically, as it is done in many countries. We need to modernize. The systems we have in place are antiquated. We're using very old systems, very labor-intensive systems that when you have these systems that you have to be depending on people to help you along the way, then you leave the door open for interventions, let's put it that way. So part of our recommendations, and by the way, I want to make a plug. I want to recommend to people, and especially in the media, to read that section. I think it's from page 150 or 51 of the report to about 160. Not a lot on the way forward and the recommendations that we've made. But certainly we're saying, you know, we need to modernize the system. We need a new passport system, for example. And we've been hearing that we were going to get a new passport machine, and because we were down to one at one stage, everything had to be going to Belmopan, etc. And the investments were minimal. I mean, you're talking about $1 million. So, you know, we certainly, or certainly I, and the people that I represent, believe that we were never serious about fixing this thing. And as a matter of fact, the report says that what we can say is that based on what has been seen by us, is that we're convinced that the current structure of the department leaves it vulnerable for continued problems. We still see that as a threat. So that was one of the first things we said in the report, you know. So we need to invest. Of course, you know what the times are in right now, and the excuse will be, well, you know, we just don't have the money, and that may very well be true in these COVID times. But there are lots of other things and lots of other wonderful recommendations that the auditor General has made, and you're absolutely right, the Auditor General, throughout at least my course in Parliament, I've seen her work. I'm a fan of her work and her office, the work that they produce, because they're the ones screaming out and telling us, look, we have leakages, we have systemic failures, we have problems in the way we manage the resources in government, and we need to fix them. Because let me finish my point. Okay. Because all of these things have an impact on the resources that we have available in times like this, like today. We need to have resources and money, and perhaps if we would have taken better care of the resources that we had in our country, if we had listened to the Auditor General and put in, for example, internal auditors in all our departments, we wouldn't have suffered the leakages that we suffered, and we'd have the resources to be more resilient in a time of shock.
Yeah. I was just, when we think back to some of the interviews, and I think even part of the presentation yesterday in the Senate, looked at the political influence on this process. Would you say that it was more about the influence that ministers and political operatives had that led to the report that came out from the Auditor General, or it was just structural? There are not enough checks and balances in place. You said that it was actually the system was too complicated that led to that. Where do you think the greater issue lies?
There's too much bureaucracy in the system, and it needs to be more straightforward, and people really, like we said, should be able to do this on their own without intervention.
Yeah.
I think that the last director we had, Locke, tried to put in systems to take away from that, and we commented her in the report. But basically, bureaucracy in this country is really overwhelming, and we believe that these things need to be streamlined. Again, we addressed in the report. We urge that the department continue to formulate, new systems, new flows. We urge that they look seriously, for example, at the nationality files, with a view of identifying and regularizing much of the nationality that was obtained, obviously through fraud, false representation, and the concealment of other materially important stuff. So there was a lot of fraud, really. There was a lot of approving of documents that should never have been.
And the recommendation is that those are reviewed and then a decision is made further?
Yes. Okay. Yes. Certainly need to review them, and then the policymakers need to decide what it's going to be, especially in the case, for example, of the Guatemalan citizens. We had asked for input, I believe, from the Solicitor General, which we never got, to be honest with you. It was promised to us, but that is a big issue too, that needs to be addressed. Well, what we've seen, again, especially leading up to the general election, there was this mad rush, which you guys covered extensively, showing this mad rush for the granting of nationality, and of course with nationality comes the right to vote. And it was in this period that the testimony revealed that some 90% of the applications that were coming in were incomplete. So one is left to wonder, what impact this had on the actual elections, because there were some 2,000 and odd people that were registered, and what impact did that have on our democracy? And if that continues, if that type of action is allowed to continue, then people who circumvent the law and people who condone this type of behavior or encourage it or do not stop it, then in fact are contributing to the weakness or the continued weaknesses that we see in our country, and that erodes our democracy.
And what do you think the scope or the reaction in government will be to some of the recommendations? Because you had earlier said that a lot of the existing problems, or a lot of the problems that were spoken about in the report still do exist. So do you get the impression that there will be any sort of follow through on some of the recommendations?
Kevin, this is political season. And I was very disappointed that we presented a report that was adopted by every member in the Senate. Okay? And right away, when you heard some of the government side talking about it, they point the finger at us and they say we're politically grandstanding. And they make the inference that, this was all about politics. How can you just support this report and then say that you believe it was all political? I mean, I was very disappointed to hear that. And this is political season, I understand that. And I understand that they are going to try and be very protective because a lot of this happened under their watch. And it's disappointing, honestly. It's very disappointing to see the obvious. I mean, it's not, most of what we have said here and most of what we have highlighted has already been highlighted by the Auditor General. Mm-hmm. We just repeat it, condense it, or present it perhaps in a little different way. Yeah. But the fact of the matter is that the hearings revealed all of this that we said. We just encouraged people to look at things and we highlighted and reinforced some things, but that report that we presented was in no way political. It was just stating the obvious. Yeah. It was just stating what had already been reported by the Auditor General in her reports and by those that testified in front of the committee. I mean, the nation knows that. So I was very, very disappointed to see that if they did not agree with the report, why didn't they present a minority report? Saying, obviously they're saying that, this is politicized. I don't see how
and I think that's unfortunate, and it is important for us to remember that there were representatives from the government appointed to that committee. Senator Salazar as the chairman, and Senator Dr. Barnett was also on the committee, and so they were there to ask the questions and to participate in the process. And I think many may look on and think it's just a matter of the current climate that makes these types of remarks appear at this time. But we to stay focused, I think, looking at why the inquiry took place. I mean, you're talking about time and resources, financial and human, that went into creating it. The challenge now is that when the report is presented within what we call our election season, you'll get the kind of pushback that you heard yesterday in the Senate. So I think
let me make this point before it slips us.
Yeah.
And leading into what you said, let it be very clear. And with this, I agree with the chairman. This hearing could not have taken place if it did not have the support of government.
Yes.
And it did. It did, because the then president of the Senate, the leader of government business, kudos to him, promised us that we would have it when the timing was right. And anyhow, the history of that.
Yes.
But this was a government-sanctioned investigation. I mean, they had to agree. Yes, the social partners, and yes, the opposition clearly were pushing for it. Yes, the people of Belize were pushing for it. But the government could have, really, if it wanted to, in spite of the public pressure, could have dug its heels in and said, no, we're not going to have it. So I'll give them credit for that they had it. And I'll even give them credit for participating in it and for contributing in it, right? With their own twists given. But they supported it. They participated in it. They were a part of the report. So how can you say now it's political? To me, that is ridiculous.
Yeah. And that's why, I think it is important for us to remind everyone and to keep them focused on the process that was executed to even get to the point of this report and the participation from sanctioning the inquiry to having representatives on the committee and even having the chairperson post on the committee, and now where we are. So let's refocus back.
Yes, and I just, further to that point, I'm wondering if you get the impression that because the allegation is that it is just a political tool, is it then that there's a suggestion that they won't follow through on some of the recommendations?
Well, Gavin, thank you for raising that question, because I started thinking about it in my flow, and I got lost in thought. But because the government supported it, because the government allowed it, because the government participated in it, because the government contributed to the report, and because the government adopted the report without dissent, then one can only hope that the politically expedient thing to do would be to follow on the recommendations of the report, and not in a piecemeal way, but in a serious way that will convince the Belizean people that we have restored some dignity and some sanctity back to our nationality process, back to our nationality documents, and that we are going to fix the things that need fixing. We're going to follow up on the investigations and hold those persons accountable that contributed to this fiasco, that contributed to this severe wave, tsunami of illegalities that took place in and around that department. And so that we can begin to heal and send a clear message to these persons that disrespected, in my view, in many ways, the hearings, for which there are penalties, by the way, for people that lied under oath, that they be held accountable, and there are many that lied under oath. And I believe that we need to lend seriousness, to reform in this country. We have called for a serious legal reform of that whole department, of that whole section. We have called for a bunch of other things, but we've called for a revisit, and certainly for a implementation of many of the recommendations that the Auditor General has so eloquently outlined.
And to put it into a bigger picture, I'm also thinking that because you are the senator representing the private sector, so perhaps you can shed some light on the bigger picture on the ways in which some of these findings do affect the country as a whole, internationally, both and from a private sector investment perspective. How does the report and the continuing problems have an effect on the greater economy, etc., of Belize?
Well, I gave an example yesterday where, and I think I was not the only one, several people and several persons that I know, and prominent persons, in fact, had revealed that their documents were questioned or scrutinized when they traveled. I was certainly able to witness that firsthand. Nothing happened, but my document was taken and was screened. No questions were asked, no explanations were given. I was just asked to wait for about 20 minutes, and my document left, and it was scrutinized. Whatever happened, I came back. And I believe some other person that worked in the public service at one time had a similar experience in Canada or whatever. Anyhow, it certainly brings a lot of ill repute to our country and to our nationality and travel documents. That's for sure. That's one. Two, back to your question, how has it changed? Like I said, it has changed us culturally, and it has changed our society. In business, it has changed the landscape. I mean, for example, Gavin, in testimony we received, many of the persons in the FIU were afraid. Really, they were afraid to pursue where was this money coming from. In testimony, we asked, the government, the leader of government business, he's a businessman. can he explain the justification for these massive investments we saw, and to give his comments on a return on those investments, and he couldn't, So we saw an explosion in investment in buildings. We saw an explosion of investment in the distributive sector. It pointed to a weakness in our migration policy, because why were we bringing in people to be opening stores? Did we have a deficiency in the distributive trade? Did we need more restaurants? Did we need more cooks? Because certainly this was the justification, or this was the reason a lot of these people were coming in. So we say no. I mean, we do not need to have more shops and more shopkeepers in this country. We do not need to have more restaurants. Those are things that we train thousands of Belizean students in business every year. And those are opportunities that should have been left for the Belizean students, for the young Belizean entrepreneurs to get into shopkeeping and restaurants, that sort of thing. No, what our migration policy should have said, well, look, we want to encourage people, and with these same investments that they're going to be bringing in, put it into industry, put it into value adding, put it into growing our exports, and put it into areas that we would have had more job creation, more jobs for the thousands of young people that we have coming out of school, that we invest 25% of our budget in educating, and then we can't find jobs for them. And perhaps we would have been more resilient today. We would have had a larger export basket, and our country would have been able to withstand these shocks we're going through right now. But what we've seen as a result of these investments is that our imports have gone up tremendously and our exports have gone down. We focused our investments again on the wrong areas.
And when we look at I think that one of the things we can look at or remember from the hearings is just the simple fact that these processes were kind of passed on, even though even the members from the public service knew it was incomplete. What type of recommendations are being made to be able to have the system itself follow through on the processes that already exist, even if we don't get to the point of revamping or simplifying, that at least what exists will be executed?
Let me start off by saying, and we have testimony to this effect, there needs to be an overhaul of the way ministers impact on the public service. There was much ado about it in the Senate yesterday, and when I brought it up, it received a lot of rebut. But we have testimony that there was a call for help that was not answered, okay? In many instances, there were calls for help to strengthen. We recognize that there are a few, good, honest, and dedicated immigration officers. We're not saying they're all that way. But testimony said that there was not enough support and enough help for those good ones. They made a call and it was not answered. At one point in testimony, we heard that, many were fearful for the life of the acting director, Maria Marin. And why? Because she was just doing her job, because she was being strict, because she was putting things in place for the hustling to stop. And we've had testimony along those lines from other witnesses and other testimony that they were concerned for their safety. We've heard one director said that people give you a part of the information, and for obvious reasons, they don't want to give you more. So perhaps the time has come now for some whistleblower legislation. Perhaps the time has come now for us to seriously look at protecting the public service, to give them that level of security that they need, and a way for them to funnel information to an totally independent, non-politically appointed group or body or institution that can perform investigations. Marlene, if we're serious about the development of this country, and if we're serious about now deploying properly those scarce resources, and now more than ever, do we need to ensure that the resources of this country are put to proper use and are not abused by a few people. The time has come, I believe, for us to have this investigative body, this independent body that can do and that will do, that's properly resourced. Because we spoke about the Integrity Commission yesterday, we spoke about the Office of the Elections and Boundaries, we spoke about all these other bodies that we have that are tasked to do certain things that have not really done them over the years, if you look at them. And a lot of the common cry is, well, they're under-resourced. But we find the resources, it seems, for every other thing that we need, and then many that we don't need. And it's a travesty that we don't allocate the resources to those organs, to those institutions in governance that lend to the strengthening of our democracy. That is a travesty.
And further, and beyond the institutional changes, I'm wondering, to just go back to something that you had said a little bit earlier, I'm wondering if you think that there's any scope for any of the persons who perpetrated some of the fraud and illegalities and some for them to actually face consequences for what now is there in black and white.
Well, to be honest with you, Gavin, we certainly believe so. I mean, given the nature of what we've seen from the Auditor General's report and especially the testimony that we received, it leaves no doubt that there were corrupt forces operating within and around the Immigration Department. And it is undeniable that the department was in serious need of attention. There is evidence that the situation was allowed or perhaps encouraged to fester, especially under the period of stewardship of Minister Elvin Penner. That is in the report. So again, we make the plea, we make the call to those authorities, especially the police and the DPP, who, by the way, we were told, because we instructed that they be given, throughout the hearings, we were told that our transcripts of the proceedings be sent to the police and the office of the DPP as we were getting them printed, as we were getting them transcribed. Our instructions was that you send copies of these transcripts to the police and to the DPP so that their work can commence immediately. Because we didn't know when we started how long these hearings were going to be, and we knew that the testimony that we were receiving was damning. So we said, the committee decided early, send what we have now to the DPP and to the police, because we don't believe that there's a need. As a matter of fact, when the then Commissioner of Police came before the committee, we were very clear in disagreeing with him when he said, well, I'm waiting for the report of the Special Select Committee for me to proceed. And we said, no, you don't need to wait for a report of the Special Select Committee to start your work. The work of the Auditor General is more than sufficient for you to commence proceeding in many areas. And that was very disappointing.
And, I think that when we, I'm sure if we have a conversation with the wider public, it would still be a question that they would ask. The issue here is, who then is accountable for what has now been documented as, you call them illegalities, whether it's circumventing the system, whether it's frauding the system. The point is that that people were able to gain immigration and nationality documents that were not, had they gone through the right process, not would have been approved or didn't meet the criteria. And so there's no accountability at this point in time. But we have heard repeatedly that this is in the hands of the DPP. But from your end, Senator, as we start to round this off, from the business community, you clearly outlined how when we have these types of things taking place, it places us in a very difficult position internationally. what are some of the things that you are hoping and will even push and advocate for will be implemented following all the work that has gone into putting together the report from the inquiry?
Let me begin by saying, Marlene, that if you and I, referring to your first comments, if you and I do not follow the letter of the law to a T, if we submit anything, any report, any application form that is incomplete, it is illegal, and we will be held to task. But we saw a lot of people, because they had influence, go to public service and tell them, no, Ray, I'll give it to you afterwards. I'll bring it in later, or I'll send in the documents afterwards. And we saw those documents expedited, incomplete documents, documents that should not have been accepted in the first place. They were accepted, and worse, they were expedited, incomplete documents. We saw people get visa, nationality, and passport in a period of 1 week, sometimes days, and sometimes less than a month. If that is not illegal, then I don't know what is. Yeah. So I want to make it very clear that many illegalities took place, was allowed to happen, was pressured into happening, or whatever. So there's a lot of room for investigations. What am I going to be pressing for? I'm going to continue to press as I always have. I'm going to support, first of all, even though the Auditor General made a few, perhaps, technical errors in her report, very few, in my view, perhaps 2 out of hundreds that she made. But I'm going to continue to press. Yeah. I'm going to continue pressing, and I think the business community, for reform. We're going to continue to say, look, we need to revamp our laws. We need to have a government that is serious about making the reforms necessary, about putting power to the checks and balances that we need in a democracy, in a modern democracy, for us to come out of this backwater image that we have, man, that we're a little country full of crime, full of illegalities, full of people where they rub you down, they come. It sends the wrong message. It discourages genuine investment. We've seen foreign investment in this country, foreign direct investment, take a big nosedive in the Marlene. And these things contribute to the black eye that we have internationally. They say, boy, if you want to go to Belize, they'll rub you down for a visa. They'll rub you down for a residence. They'll rub you down for this. They'll rub you down for this paper. It takes forever to open a business. It takes forever to get a document. It takes forever for everything. And it's all because we have unnecessary bureaucracy, quite frankly, in most instances, perpetuated so that you could hustle from people. And that needs to end. If we're serious about growing our economy now, especially there's going to be, in this era of COVID and post-COVID, there's going to be such a mad competition for foreign direct investment and for money and resources. And we have to clean up our act because there's going to be so much competition for the same investors. Yeah. So we have to clean up our image. We have to portray that things are not going to be run in this country the same way they've been run for the last decade, right? Or for the last 15, 20 years. We have to do things differently because the formulas and the systems that we've been using have not been very productive for the common man, for the majority of us. Increasingly, we have poverty in this country, and we know that when you live in a corrupt society, that the people that suffer first are the poor people.
All right.
So we need to clean up, Marlene. We need to clean up. If our country is going to survive in this new post-COVID era, we have to send a clear message that just like how Belize hopefully will be COVID-free, that we're corruption-free, and that we're investment-friendly, and that we want you to come and live and retire and invest and spend in Belize, and we're going to make it as easy as possible for you to do it. And you don't have to know nobody, and you don't have to get no favors, and you don't have to get a recommendation from no politician. But there's a process that's easy to follow.
Yeah.
and the process is going to be free of corruption and intervention. Nobody on the rub you down for push your papers to the head of the line. Nobody on the rub you down for political contribution, because remember, I help you get your visa, I help you get your nationality, I help you get your passport, or I help you get this permit or the other. No, that is not going to attract the level of foreign direct investment that we need. It's not, quite frankly, it's not going to attract the level of local investment that we need. And those that will seek us out will be those that are predatory, those that want to take advantage of the situation and our desperate state that we will be in. So unless we do things differently, we can't expect different results. I said it yesterday in the Senate. What is the definition of insanity? Is that you do the same thing over and over and expect a different result. So if we do the same thing over and over in this country, we should not expect any different results. And I'm hoping, Marlene, I truly am hopeful, as I always am. While I'm critical, I'm hopeful that these recommendations don't fall on deaf ears, and that serious moves be done to investigate, to correct, to legislate where it's needed, and to make it a priority.
Well, and I think in closing, it really has to be, and you said it very clearly, that the chamber, the business sector, will continue to push for reform. We must note that just earlier this week, the chamber released an issue talking about the procurement practices and how they must be adhered to. So once again, I think it's underscoring the fact that having systems in place, and you are talking about the reform that is necessary at the Nationality and Immigration Department, but it's also that there is follow through in using the processes and protocols that are established.
And the chamber had every right to put out that release. I mean, here we are with scarce resources that are needed to provide for the tens of thousands of Belizeans that are without jobs. Yeah. Here we are needing to help people with the basic food items, because we have a responsibility to these people. The government has a responsibility to these people in time of crisis, right? We have to ensure that our people have food to eat. We have to ensure that those that do not have jobs can survive, right? That's a responsibility. And here we are giving away tens of millions of dollars in long-term contracts that are less than transparent, by the way, in the way they were issued. Yeah. Okay.
When there is an established protocol in place.
Yes. Yeah. Well, they will always say that. Yeah. Yeah. They will always say that. But do you know those protocols? Do you know what process was employed, Marlene? Did you see a public tender going out for these things? Mm-hmm. Was the results published? Do we know the details? No, man. They always say, oh, but we followed this and we followed that. Yeah, fine. That's politics for you. But the end net result is that this government, leading up to an election, is beginning to sign away leases, long-term leases for property. It's beginning to give away 10 years of the proceeds from our lottery systems, having promised already, by the way, in previous years that we would have now under this new private-public partnership or whatever arrangement they'd gotten into, we would expect certain flows in the budget, flows that we never saw, right? Ministers got up in the House and said, oh, but we earn so much revenue from lotteries. And then you look in the budget and it's not reflected there. I've highlighted these things before. And no, you're not just to give them a short year, you're to give them a 10-year contract. Yeah. I mean, please.
I believe I opened a whole other issue for you as we're trying to round off the show.
I'm just supporting what the chamber has come out with and to lend to the seriousness, especially in COVID times, when we need those resources to come directly to the benefit of the Belizean people, man.
Absolutely. Senator, we appreciate you having this conversation with us this morning. And while we closed off with a separate issue, it still boils down to the very same thing. It's about being able to look at corrupt practices or practices that can definitely be improved. We appreciate you sharing your insight, and thank you very much.
Always a pleasure, Marlene. Thank you.
We're going to go ahead now and take a break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about what the reality is like in Blue Creek Village, where they are under a state of emergency due to COVID-19. So please